we got Alan on first. All right. Hold that clip because I want to immediately get to Mr. Alan Dershowitz. Let's see. Pop him up on the Skype. There he is. That's Alan Dershowitz. All right. How you doing, sir?
Good, and you?
Very good. Very good. Man, you've been in the news or part of the news for just decades. I don't want to make it sound like, hey, it's the old guy on the, but for decades, you have consistently kept, I don't know if you wanted to keep yourself in the news, but been in the news.
Well, I am an old guy. I'm 81 years old.
81, God bless.
I certainly didn't want to be in the news for being falsely accused of sexual misconduct, but I have no choice, so I have to fight back. I was accused by a woman with a long history of lying about well-known people, and by a woman who had an email which she tried to suppress, in which she admitted she never met me, never heard of me. She had to be told who I was. Her agent said, put Dershowitz in the book, even though you never met him, because that will help sell the book. And then her lawyer says in a recorded conversation, it was impossible for you to have met Dershowitz. You're wrong, simply wrong. A former director of the FBI does an investigation, finds out there was no basis for it. She tells the FBI she didn't have sex with me. She tells her best friend she didn't have sex with me. Then she meets her lawyers, and they tell her there's a pot at the end of the rainbow if she would say she had sex with me. So she said she had sex with me 7 times, including in front of my house with another woman in a car, and then she and the other woman come into my house where my wife has a professional office, my daughter had an au pair, and we had video surveillance. So the story is totally made up, but people still believe it, so I had to write my book.
That's what happens. The correction, if you will, never gets the traction that the initial story gets, because I think we're living in a time where people want to believe the outrageous story more than they want the truth.
Of course. And not only doesn't the truth get the same coverage, it gets no coverage. Nobody has reviewed my book. No major publication has interviewed me for this. In fact, several publications have presented my false accuser as if nobody has ever challenged her story. I can prove that she falsely accused Tipper Gore, Al Gore, Bill Clinton, said she met the Queen of England. You name it, she's claimed it. Said she was 14 when she met Jeffrey Epstein. She was 17. Nobody reports that. She said it, it must be true. You know, the Me Too movement has some real positives. But as Eric Hoffa, the philosopher, once said, all causes start as movements, then they become businesses, ultimately rackets. And what we're seeing is the Me Too movement, pushed by unscrupulous lawyers and women willing to lie for money, is becoming a racket. I have a friend who's a lawyer in Los Angeles. She says she's writing out checks every week, $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. People are coming forward and accusing famous actors and actresses and producers and directors who never met these people, but they don't want an accusation, so they'll shell out the money. It's just the cost of doing business. It's becoming a real racket.
Do you think there's a lot of people in power that are hurting these people?
Of course there are, and they're hurt terribly by when you have a woman coming out and making a false accusation against somebody she never met, because it tends to weaken the credibility of the real victims. Look, in this case, I'm the victim, and I'm going to speak out. I agree with Me Too. If you're a victim, speak out. I'm speaking out. I'll speak out till the day I die. Then my wife will speak out. Then my kids will speak out. Then my grandkids will speak out. We're not resting until this woman, this false accuser, ends up in prison for perjury or extortion.
Will they find her hanging?
Other crimes. I hope not. I hope not. But she deserves to go to jail, and her lawyers, if they in fact pressured her into doing this, deserve to be disbarred.
Do you feel that because you have been falsely accused, that is a reason why you have defended Jeffrey Epstein over the years?
Oh no, I defended Jeffrey Epstein
prior to these accusations.
Oh yeah. Here's the story. I was introduced to Jeffrey Epstein by the Lady Rothschild, a very eminent woman who told me that he donates to Harvard and he is a very well thought of scientific mind.
You were a professor there, right?
I was a professor, and I went to conferences with the president of Harvard, with some of the most eminent professors, Nobel Prize winners. But once the minute he was accused, my relationship with him changed. I became his lawyer at that point. And then once he was convicted, I had no relationship with him. Then years later, I was accused by a woman who never met me, in order to try to get $1 billion
Jeez.
from Leslie Wexner. The plan was very simple. Leslie Wexner's wife called it a shakedown. His lawyer called it a shakedown. They accuse me in public, gets all the publicity. Then they go to Wexner in private and say to his lawyers, look, the same woman that accused Dershowitz accused your client of having sex between 5 and 10 times, unprotected. He made her wear Victoria's Secret type lingerie. If you want to be Dershowitz, fine. If you don't, there are ways of resolving this. So it was a shakedown, and I'm going to prove that at the trial. And either money was paid, or if it wasn't paid, why didn't they go after this guy? Did they not believe that she was telling the truth about him, but they believed she was telling the truth about me? That's ridiculous.
Wow. Guilt by Accusation is the name of the book, and what a great title that is, because that's exactly what happens these days. You see it on Twitter a lot, too. Somebody will make an accusation. It will get so many hits and views and favorited and retweeted. Right. And then if they have to post a retraction of some sort, it gets nothing.
Right. I recently issued a challenge on Twitter. I challenge, because people accuse me all the time there for this. So I challenge them to read my book on Kindle. It's $1.98, less than a candy bar. You can't lose. Read the book and then tweet. Don't tweet from ignorance. Tweet after you've read the book. Nobody has read the book.
Alan, what Twitter are you talking about if you want people to actually educate themselves first and then tweet from a position of knowledge on a certain subject? Twitter, I honestly believe this. Twitter, and a lot of other social media, but Twitter's pretty much the name brand, is so detrimental to society. I think it's vicious. I think the amount of lies that come out of it and the amount of anonymous harassment and brutalizing that comes out of it is not outweighed by this concept, this thing that might have looked good on the drawing board of a free exchange of ideas and beliefs and science.
Yes, I agree with you. I've instructed my lawyers to sue several people who have called me terrible names on Twitter without any basis. There's a right of free speech, but there is a responsibility not to defame and certainly not to call people terrible names and descriptions without any basis in fact at all. So if you're on Twitter and you call me any of those names, you'll get a letter from my lawyer.
As a victim of these accusations, does that lead to any empathy for other victims that are accusing other people of sexual assault, of any of these things? I mean, it seems, I may be uneducated, but it seems that you lack some form of empathy for some victims from the Jeffrey Epstein.
Not at all. I have represented victims. I've represented victims of rape. I've represented victims of sexual harassment. I represented a woman who was locked up in a mental hospital by her husband. I've represented loads and loads of women victims, victims of spousal abuse. I have tremendous sympathy for real victims. I have no sympathy for my accuser who sat down with her lawyers and planned to extort and to lie, to commit perjury, and to make money. And the tragedy is she's made a lot of money. And even if I were to have a videotape of her admitting to her friends that she never met me, nothing would happen to her. I went to the FBI with this. I went to the Justice Department. I went to the district attorney's office in New York. None of them is interested because nobody wants to take on the Me Too movement. I'm sympathetic to the Me Too movement, but not to its abuse and not to people who abuse it by making real victims seem less credible.
That's why every case has to be taken on its own merit or lack thereof. We've seen people get out in front of the public and talk about abuses and scandals and whatnot that have turned out to be complete lies. But that doesn't mean that someone else isn't telling the truth or that someone else isn't also lying. When they were saying the Me Too movement started with believe all women. No, that makes no sense. You know what it reminds me of? Merit.
There was a time when I was a young man where in the South they had a motto, believe all white people. Just believe a white person. If a white person says that a black person looked at me funny, lynch him. That's what it was. When you start saying believe all anybody, believe all Jews, believe all Muslims, believe all whites, believe all blacks, you're into bigotry.
There's a problem, and we're so used to these days the old wide brush. We love painting everything with a wide brush. If you see one example of something, it means everything is that, and you got to get on Twitter and spread that around. You talk about when you were a young man, you were known as a liberal.
I still am.
I understand that, but here's the twist. Liberalism has changed so much over the course of your history. Where do you see it now as opposed to where what it meant back when you were a younger man?
When liberalism hasn't changed, its radicals have taken over what liberals used to do, and radicals don't care about due process. It's free speech for me, but not for thee. For me, I believe in the Constitution, which is why I'm defending President Trump's right not to be impeached, even though I voted against him, and I'm a liberal Democrat, and I'll continue to vote liberal Democrat. But I also supported the right of Richard Nixon not to be treated unfairly during the impeachment process. I defended the right of Bill Clinton. The original title of my book, which was now called The Case Against Impeaching Trump, the original title was The Case Against Impeaching Hillary Clinton, because I wrote in 2016 when it looked like she'd get elected. The Republicans were swearing they would impeach her on day one. So I'm neutral. I'm objective. I put the Constitution over politics. I am still a liberal. I'm still a civil libertarian. Politico wrote an article, I think it had a title on it, saying, don't ask what's happened to Alan Dershowitz. Ask what's happened to the rest of us. We've eliminated liberalism and conservatism. Standard conservatism has disappeared. When I used to debate William Buckley, we had a liberal versus a conservative. Today, it's the radicals on the extreme left and some of the radicals on the extreme right, and people aren't debating, they're shouting at each other. Tomorrow, I'm debating Starr, the man who was the special prosecutor
for Clinton.
In the Clinton case. He's a conservative, I'm a liberal, but we're friends, and we talk to each other. We get along fine. I do not get along with the radicals on the left who won't even speak to me because they think I'm a traitor because A, I'm defending Donald Trump's rights, and B, I'm attacking women who lie and make false accusations. But I'm going to stick to my friend.
But with all the time you spent with Epstein, you had no clue of anything that he was doing?
Nobody did.
How did nobody do it when he had that?
Is that the truth, or are you just afraid of the Clintons?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
I mean, honestly, it sounds...
Let me tell you, I met Jeffrey Epstein mostly at Harvard University. He had an office. He was always very polite. He never had young women around. Nobody. Ask the president of Harvard. Ask David Gergen. Ask the provost of Harvard. Ask the president of MIT. Nobody knew until he was arrested. I was at his home. There were no photographs. There were no young women. There was no way anybody would ever know. My wife met him. My grandchildren met him. My daughter met him. My son met him. We all met him at these various conferences and events, but nobody had any inkling that nobody called his plane the Lolita Express. Nobody called his island Pedophile Island. There was nothing like that. And I was never in any place where I ever saw a young or underage woman.
Do you think he hid that from you because you were a lawyer? Do you think he hid that from you because you were a lawyer?
Plus, Pedophile Island would be a dead giveaway.
Possibly. But he hid it from Larry Summers, the president of Harvard. He hid it from the provost of Harvard.
Well, I mean, those are his employers. You wouldn't just have that stuff out in the open. It's not like he would have
I was just an academic colleague, and he wouldn't have that stuff out in the open. I think he lived two separate lives, completely separate. And what he did in private.
You're currently speaking on your innocence of lack of knowledge of his activities, not so much to actually what he was doing.
No, what he was doing was horrible. But I didn't know about it.
Okay.
We had ever known about it. My God, we'd been out of there so fast. I mean, Epstein knew my wife. He knew me. He knew we've been married for 33 years. He knew I don't ever fool around. I don't touch anybody. I don't hug. I don't flirt. He knew that. And so he would never, ever offer me an opportunity to do that or show me what he was doing, because I would have been out of there like a bat in hell. I don't tolerate that kind of conduct.
What do you think about the intrigue and mystery surrounding his death over there in lockup?
Well, there's a mystery, and I think he probably wanted to kill himself because I don't think he could endure being deprived of his pleasures for the rest of his life. But how did he get to kill himself? How did the authorities not stop him? I think that has to be investigated very thoroughly, and I'm not satisfied with the current resolution. I think we have to look more deeply into whether or not guards were bribed, whether or not he was allowed to commit suicide. Remember,
Right.
he tried.
Why did we?
Would
why
you
did
take
we-
Would you take up that cause for the victims of his crimes to figure out
They wouldn't want me to
what
be
happened as
They
a
wouldn't
form
want
of
me to be-
balance?
Yeah, they wouldn't want me to be a lawyer in the case. The former victims obviously don't like his lawyers. They think we made too good a deal for him, and maybe we did, but that's our job to make a good deal. But I support them. I have said over and over again, I support a complete investigation. I want to see justice done to real victims.
Sorry to interrupt.
I also
you're
want to
fine,
see
man. My
justice done to false accusers. But justice to false accusers means imprisonment.
Lawyers are on a weird. They're in a weird position a lot of times because, especially defense lawyers, you just
Sure.
look sometimes. I've watched so many programs about just notorious murderers and
Of course.
watching their lawyers on
Defend
behalf
them.
defending these guys. You
I have
wind up
defended
hating the lawyers.
worst. I have defended the worst people in the world, the people accused of some of the worst crimes imaginable, and I'm going to continue to do it for the rest of my life because I strongly believe in the system where everybody and the most despised need lawyers more than anybody else. And so I never turn down a case because the person is hated or despised. I
Right.
have several rules. I don't take people who are continuing criminals, that is in the business of crime, drug dealers or terrorists. I don't represent people who are fugitives. I don't represent people who generally threaten me or my family. But beyond that, I'll defend anybody. I defended O.J. Simpson, Mike Tyson, Patricia Hearst,
Jim Baker.
Klaus
Jim
von
Baker.
Bülow, which was
Claude
O.J.
Bulow.
was
I
innocent.
represented all those people, the Jewish Defense League in a murder case, and that's my job, and I love my job, and I'm proud of my job.
Do you think?
Continue to do it.
Do you think, in order to defend those people, there has to be some circular logic or mental gymnastics that you
No.
do to
No
not
different from Dr.
understand the gravity of like the guilt of these people, or do you
No.
just believe so wholeheartedly in the goodness of people that you overlook that?
No. Oh, I certainly don't believe in the goodness of people. I believe in the correct
the system. Right.
How am I different than a surgeon who's on the emergency ward and they wheel in a mafia killer, and you can either save his life or not save his life, and if you save his life, you know maybe tomorrow he's going to go out and kill again. Or a priest who comes in and tells you terrible things about himself and you can't disclose them. These are all part of our system, and the system makes America the country it is with civil liberty. So I'm proud of the role I play, but I don't deserve to be falsely accused.
Do you have to?
Criminal behavior.
Not at all.
Do you have to take on these cases? Is that part of the judicial system? Like if
It is. I can choose not to, but I choose to. And some of the first cases I took, death row inmates, people accused of murder, I took on a pro bono basis. Half of my cases have been pro bono.
Wow.
Free. I don't charge when I represent poor people.
Would you work with the
And
Innocence Project?
I work with Innocent Projects, and I have my own Innocence Project. I've represented numerous innocent people who I've gotten out of prison, and I've never lost a client to death row. So I'm very proud of my role. But I have to go now. But It was great talking to you. Please read my book, $1.98 on Kindle. You can't go wrong. And then write me a note. Tell me if you think I'm guilty or not, and what should happen to the woman who accused me.
Absolutely. Guilt by accusation. Alan Dershowitz, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Take care now.